The question that I've been wrestling with this week is, which party would Jesus join if he were an American today? The Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Tea Party? Some people think they know. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty fed up with people who think that they know how Jesus would vote. It's the height of arrogance and the fruit of much hypocrisy. A church should never attach itself to a political party, and no political party should ever attach itself to a church. If Jesus himself were running for office today, I don't think we'd even elect him. Author Becky Garrison said it best in her book, Red and Blue God, Black and Blue Church. Even though Christians talk about following the will of Christ, if he were on the ballot today, would we vote for him? Well, for starters, his message is geared toward those undesirables who probably aren't even registered to vote and may not have voter ID cards in Oklahoma. Also, that business of separating the sheep who are eligible to vote for Christ from the hordes of unregistered goats represents a pollster's nightmare. And let's face it, Jesus can't spin worth a darn. He tells it like it is, and he doesn't give a rip who he offends. How can you have a candidate who can't even be trusted to go to a fundraising breakfast and behave in front of those all-important special interest groups, those that are needed to finance the cost of a mounting modern political campaign? Now, let's examine his staff. His campaign manager looks like one of those crazy homeless guys I see preaching in Times Square. And his female companion has a checkered past that would make Monica Lewinsky blush. He hangs out with tax collectors, drunkards, and a host of unsavory characters. And last but not least, his trusted disciples, the guys he appointed to key leadership positions, make snafus almost every time they accompany him, their leader, in public. Get this, he can't even get any respect in his own hometown, kind of like Al Gore in 2000. No, if Jesus stepped into the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee headquarters, both Karl Rove and Democratic head honcho Howard Dean would show him the door for sure. There's no way they'd even remotely consider his candidacy as the leader of the free world. But then again, Jesus made it clear that his kingdom lay elsewhere. And while members of both parties would love to claim Jesus or God as one of their own, doing so is, to put it politely, blasphemous. Now, anytime in American history when we see a religion hitching its star to the wagon of a particular political party, it is bad for the state and usually even worse for the church. At one time or another, most of us have seen the bumper sticker that distributed by Jerry Falwell's followers that says, "Vote Christian." Right? And people who have these stickers are very clear about what they mean. For them, to vote Christian means to vote against abortion, stem cell research, gay marriage, and a small host of other controversial issues. Now, none of which, by the way, were ever mentioned by Jesus. And none of these social issues can be found anywhere in the Gospels. I'm just saying. They're not in there. Now, you'd think if these were so central to the faith that he would have at least mentioned them, maybe given a nod in their direction. But no. Instead, Jesus focused mostly on helping the poor. In fact, the Bible has over 2,000 verses about helping the poor, more than any other single subject. Now, like Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, you might want to write that down. It's a great one. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, the passage that homophobes don't like to deal with. It reads, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. This was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy, but forgetting that it's the single most talked about issue in the Scriptures, forgetting the thousands of verses about helping the poor, and that Jesus never mentioned homosexuality, abortion, or stem cells. Still, each election season, certain churches hand out voters' guides that rate the candidates based on their positions on these controversial and, may I say, unbiblical issues. They've come to be known as wedge issues because they serve to create a wedge that divides up the American people. The proponents of these wedge issues present it as a battle between people of faith and their enemies, which is ridiculous. Let's look at abortion. The question is not, are you for it or against it? The question is, do we get rid of abortion by outlawing it? If you look at the statistics of women over 30, there were the same number of women having abortions in 1950 as there are today. The same number in 1950 as there are today. That means that even when abortion was illegal, there were the same number as there are today when you look at women over 30. Now, which tells us that making it illegal does not end abortion. What's different today is the number of teenage abortions. So knowing that making it illegal won't end abortion, let's look at the economic issues. I heard Reverend Tony Campolo talking about this. He's a Baptist minister. He said, let's imagine a 17-year-old girl who's living in poverty here in America. These days, that's talking about millions of Americans. Over 43 million Americans are living in poverty according to the most recent census. Over 43 million. That's like over 100 times Greater Tulsa's population are living in poverty in America today. Now, you're 17 and you get pregnant, which, if the only sex ed you've ever gotten is don't do it, it's likely to happen. But that's another sermon. You're 17, you're poor, you get pregnant. Let's say you find a job working minimum wage. That's if you can find a job these days. But let's say you find a job working minimum wage. Now, on minimum wage, you can't buy food, pay rent, and take care of yourself in this country, let alone a baby. There's still no medical coverage if you're poor in this country. So she'd have to pay the hospital bills to have the baby. We don't provide child care in this country, so she'd have to figure out how to pay for that too. And we wonder why she has an abortion. Studies show that when you make it economically feasible for mothers to have their babies, most do. Most abortions in this country are not out of emotional convenience or propriety. Most are out of economic necessity. My point is that both sides of the debate are half right. Life is sacred, and economics is the major issue. Being a religious person is about being able to honor what's right in both parties' positions. And that's why it's a moral failure for a church to align itself with one political party. The number one issue outlined for Christians in the Bible is that helping the poor is obligatory. Here's a description from Matthew chapter 25, offered by my late colleague, Dr. Forrest Church, who wrote, Jesus tells his disciples that when we die, there's a quiz. That's what Jesus says. The questions, by the way, are not who is the second person in the Trinity. Should women be allowed to be priests? It's not in there. During your lifetime, were you sufficiently militant in your abhorrence of high taxes, homosexuality, stem cell research, Islam, and abortion? It's not in there. According to Jesus, in the book of Matthew, he assured his disciples, if you have done these things to the very least of these, our brothers and sisters, you have done them to me. The questions are these. Did you feed the hungry? Clothe the naked? Heal the sick? And visit those in prison? Get them correct, Jesus says, and we will know heaven. Jesus was not really ambiguous about his priorities or about what he thought ours should be. And that's why it's so disappointing in a time when healthcare costs are crippling, public education is failing miserably, hunger and homelessness plague millions, unemployment is astronomical, foreclosures and fear of foreclosures are everywhere. The country is in a perpetual and economically crippling war. And most Americans are afraid that our country's best days are in the past. Despite all of this, the way that the religious right has chosen to participate in politics is through creating a litmus test of a narrow set of wedge issues. Is anyone else as disappointed as I am? And it's not only bad for politics, it's bad for the church.